Welcome back. So let's talk about the future of Enlisted and the direction that it may or may not be headed. Time will tell. So as I'm sure by now most of you know, we're going to be getting jet fighters in the next update. And they're pretty raw, they're pretty early for the most part. The ME-262, I believe, had its first flight in like 1942. I think the Meteor went into service at the end of the war in like really limited numbers, but it at least flew around a little bit. I think around Belgium. You have the P-80, and you have the Su-9, which the Su-9 came about after the war, but it's still very close. Even in the tech trees, we've started to see the top end get into, for some nations, more experimental things, and for other nations, get into more post-war things. For the Soviets, we've seen the AS-44, which, like my friends and I refer to it as the not an AK. For the Americans, we have the T-20, which, if we eventually get an M14, functionally in-game, it's not going to be any different. Like, they're going to do the same thing. They're different guns, they operate differently, but those mechanics don't really matter in a game like this. So, we're basically on the cusp of hitting the Cold War. And for some people, that's going to be a bad thing. For some people, it's going to be a good thing. I think for a lot of people, it may even be a little bit disappointing, because there's a lot of breadth to Enlisted that isn't there yet. And what I mean by that is right now, we have 4 focus trees, or main trees, for the USSR, USA, Germany, and Japan. And a lot of people, and this dates back to the campaigns, wanted to see splits for France, splits for Italy, maps for the invasion of France, maps for going into Italy, potentially things in Poland. And to some extent, we've seen some minor nations and some major nations that aren't the 4 listed be highlighted in-game. So for example, the American tech tree is really not an accurate name. It should be the Western Allies, because there's British stuff all throughout that tech tree. We've had like Anzac squads come in with events and whatnot before, so realistically it's not the American tree, it's the Western Allies, and eventually, if we keep going down the track that I think we're going down, it's probably going to become the NATO tree. So, okay, going back to the campaigns, I think that they lost an opportunity going away from the campaigns for really interesting one-off scenarios. So, for those of you that were there, we had Moscow, Tunisia, Berlin, Stalingrad, Normandy, and the Pacific. And the Pacific is basically Guadalcanal, but it's just called the Pacific. And those were all essentially specific battles. The idea was that they'd have somewhat curated gear in them. And this would have allowed Enlisted to do one-off campaigns, because all the progression was locked to each individual side on each individual campaign. It wasn't like a big global like tech tree the way we have now. But it would have allowed them to, say, drop the Spanish Civil War. And they could have done a one-off campaign for it. You'd have Spain versus Spain with international partners assisting both sides. So you'd have some German stuff with like the Condor Legion. You'd have some of the Soviets that came and fought there. You'd probably have some of the like guerrilla groups, like the irregulars that came from other places like America and whatnot, because there were volunteers from all around the world that went and fought in that Civil War. And it would have given you a really interesting hodgepodge of different gear, and it would have allowed you to bring in a more unknown conflict. Like, people know that it happened, but very few people really know a whole lot about what happened, where people fought, and who was there. Like, I personally would have really liked to have seen like a World War I campaign, a Russo-Japanese War, Spanish-American War, you know, all these little things that would fit really well into a campaign, but don't really need or deserve their own full game, and a lot of them can use variations of equipment that's already in-game. Like, we already have Lewis guns in-game, we already have Springfields in-game, we already have Leonfields in-game, you get the idea, right? So asset-wise, it wouldn't require the same amount of development that making a whole new game would, or whatever. Obviously, that is not the route that the game went, and to some extent that opportunity has gone away because of that, because now things in Enlisted fall into a more homogenized system. So what I mean by that is, if you come out with a map, that map needs to make sense to some extent, and more than just one BR. That works with Europe, because a lot of the equipment that you see in, like, the American or the German tech tree was used from the beginning of the war to the end of the war. And some of it was phased out, and some of it was brought back, depending on which side we're talking about and where we are in the war, and so on and so forth. But theoretically, right, you could make a map and you could put it in France, and you could have it be exclusively for, like, BR 1, 2, and 3, and have it show the invasion of France. But the thing is, you can take that very same map, and you can also use it for late war, so you don't have to lock it to early war. And you can use it for pushing the Germans back into Germany, because there are locations that were fought over both times. And there are regions where, like, the specific farm or whatever may not have been the battlefield, but that section of France was fought over. So it's an easier avenue for that, because every time that they've... Well, no, it's only happened, like, I think once now, during the merge. But one of the points that people made was that they wanted to make sure that there was still, like, a historic light focus to the game, so in essence they didn't want America going into Moscow, right? Like, they didn't want USA v Russia. They wanted America versus Germany, right? So it still kind of followed this, like, a light version of the campaign map system. So to some extent, that's going to limit what they develop. The other thing is, I think there are lessons that have been learned in War Thunder when it comes to tech trees. For a long time, War Thunder came out with new individual tech trees for every nation, and for a long time in this game, I have been vocal that I don't think new tech trees are a good idea. I think that there's a potential for 1 or 2 new tech trees, but I think that the new releases that they've done in War Thunder have been very intelligent, in that they took other nations and added them into existing tech trees. So, for example, in Enlisted, we have the quote-unquote American tech tree that's really Britain and America. Like, virtually half the tech tree is British. Realistically, I think if we were to see France in the game, we're not going to get a French split. We're not going to get, like, a 5th French flag at the top. But what I think we could do is get a 7th line, because there's, like, well, I guess it's like 6 with, like, some split offs here and there for snipers and whatnot. But the point is, they could put a new line right above the Springfield rifles, right at the top, and it could be all French equipment that goes from BR1 to BR5. So they could sit there and they could have their mass rifles, their mass submachine guns, They could have their light machine guns. They could have an extra line for their tanks and their planes, and just put tanks and planes together in the same line. They could drop the tanks and planes into the existing tank and plane line, but I feel like the solution is to have each nation have its own national lines, like a national weapon line and a national vehicle line, not to mix and match. Because that allows you to play to more of your national identity. Like, even in the current American, like, Western Allies tech tree, I think I would like to see the American and British stuff split into, like, an American gun line and a British gun line. But that's just me. The thing is, to enable something like that, they also need to make it so that you can pick up soldiers and choose their ethnicity. So you can go in, and when you enlist a new soldier, you can be like, I want this guy to be British, I want this guy to be French, I want this guy to be American, whatever, right? And have that persist over to the squad when you put them in there. Or, designate squads and have them change. Like, right now, all the squads are listed as having, like, a designation. So they'll be, like, the 6th Tank Battalion, or, like, the 1st Signal Regiment, or whatever, right? If they were instead, like, Rifleman 3, and then you could select, the British Regiment, the French Regiment, the American Regiment, right? That might be a better solution for that. Regardless, the point here is, I think the direction that Enlisted is going to go, after having played through it in War Thunder, is going to be a further release of more and more modern stuff. Right? Like, I rambled on for a little bit about how they could implement the things that I think we all want them to implement that they haven't, but I don't think that we're going to get that right away. They can come out with content like that at their leisure, kind of how they have been, where they put in things here and there as they go. But I'm not sure that we're going to see the whole campaign level of release that we would have seen before. Like, in the past, we would have seen a campaign come out, it would have had, like, 20 levels for the two sides, like 20 levels for, say, France, 20 levels for Germany, right? And realistically, that wouldn't be crazy to see them develop, because, mostly it would be coming out with new French stuff. For the Germans, they have most of it already. They just have to come out with some new, like, Panzer 1s and Panzer 2s, and maybe some early war planes, but they already have some decent early war planes. They already have, the guns that they would want, so mostly it would be developing the French. But the way that we see releases go in Enlisted, I don't really see that happening. Generally, something comes out for every nation, and usually it's like 2 or 3 things for each nation. So, for example, in the upcoming update, in the tech tree, we're seeing a gun and a plane for Germany, we're seeing a plane for the Western Allies, and we're seeing an emplacement, but, like, the emplacement doesn't really count to me. It's not something you can research and equip on your soldiers. For the Japanese, we're seeing a new plane and a reused asset. For Russia, we're seeing 2 guns and a plane. So, you get the idea. It's like 2 or 3 things for every nation, and they come out with some premiums. For the French idea, they would have to do all of the new content for France. Or it would have to be a longer update cycle, because it would be like 9 things for France and 1 thing for Germany, Russia, and Japan. Or maybe they'd even skip Japan. I think it's happened before where a nation hasn't gotten something in an update, but the point here is that it would be kind of a big investment for them to do a release like that. And from what I've seen in War Thunder, from more of a business perspective, coming out with new stuff in lower BRs doesn't really seem like it's very lucrative for them. Now, like, I'm talking about this from the outside looking in, like, when they come out with tigers, like premium tigers, you see them, but you don't see them that much. But when they come out with a premium, like, T-72, or premium KA-50, or a premium Apache, or an A-10, or whatever, right? Whatever the new equipment is that's at the top end, that sells like hotcakes, and you see them everywhere. And just based off of how I saw War Thunder develop from like the earlier 2010s to now, it just seems much more likely to me that we're going to be progressing more and more into the Cold War. And as we go, we're going to see 2 or 3 things come out for each nation, each patch, and they're probably going to continue to push into the future. So, like, this patch, we're getting Meteors and ME-262s. Next patch, next patch we probably won't get another plane. We'll probably get some sort of tank. But the patch after that, it wouldn't surprise me if we see another later war ME-262, and maybe we see, like, the F-80s with better guns on them. And then maybe at the end of the year we see like a big Korea update, right? Because most of the stuff is already there for that. We already have the M2 carbine. We already have the Corsair. We already have some versions of the SKS and the RD-44 and whatnot, and the AS-44. So I don't think it would be a huge stretch for them to make their biggest patch of the year the release of BR6, and have the release of BR6 be like 1947 to like 1953, something like that. And I'm sure that if they came out with that, anything that they attached to it, because it would be, you know, top BR, top of the game, would probably sell really well. So, I mean, let me know what you guys think down below. In my experience with War Thunder, like, yes, they did come out with a bunch of new nations as they went, but then they hit a point where they just started pushing the Cold War, and they pushed it rapidly, and, you know, they went year after year after year, and they skipped a lot of stuff as they went. And now that they're basically in modern times, they've been slowly backfilling stuff. But I mean, from, what, like 2019 until now, they've just been pushing forward into the Cold War. It would not surprise me if we see exactly that happen in Enlisted, where they start with a handful of 1950s things, then they jump to like the 1960s and forget about 3/4 of the stuff in the 1950s. And then later on, like every future patch, they backfill like a handful of things into World War II, a handful of things into the 1950s. I just feel like that's the route they're gonna go because it generates hype and it sells products. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're just seeing the end of World War II. Maybe we'll be sitting in World War II for years. Maybe I'm gonna be really, really surprised, and we're gonna see like Romania and France get like huge updates at the end of the year. That'd be pretty cool, right? I think some of the lesser, or not, maybe not lesser, but some of the smaller, I think that's a better word for it, tertiary, ancillary, whatever, Axis allies don't get the representation in a lot of games and media that they could. Like, we do have the ZH guns, we do have the IAR plane, and the POTES and whatnot. So, like, we do have some of their equipment, but again, we don't have any squads from any of the Axis allies. So, I don't know, it'd be interesting. Well, okay, I guess technically we probably have a plane squad, but it would be interesting to get some infantry squads, and it would be interesting to get more of their weapons. I don't know. Let me know what you think down below. As per usual, get out there, kick ass, take names, and win your games.